Thanks very much, Chris and Sylvia, for inviting me to be the comic turn at the end of the day, and thank you to the audience for staying here. Yes, as Chris says, I'm going to change direction quite significantly. I'm going to stop looking down at the ocean floor and look up into the sky almost. So the astrobiological implications of chemosynthesis. Did I do that right? Maybe not. Yeah, there we go. All right, so first of all, astrobiology. Well, this became a sort of in subject about, I don't know, what, 20 years ago or something, when we really started to be able to think about how we were going to decide whether there was the possibility of life beyond the Earth. And this was a lot of things all came together at the same time. There was the discovery of the hydrothermal vents and the discovery of the fauna around the hydrothermal vents. And this coincided within a few years of the discovery of planets around other stars. And it also coincided with a rich period of planetary exploration, looking at the moons of Jupiter from, first of all, the Voyager satellites and then the Galileo satellite. So astrobiology was all these things coming together, and it's sort of very loosely defined as the study of the origin of life on Earth, and also an exploration of its possible existence elsewhere, where elsewhere is beyond the Earth, so within the solar system, and now beyond the solar system. And for a long time, there was a lot of discussion of this thing, the Goldilocks hypothesis. We needed somewhere that was not too hot, not too cold, it had to be just right. And pictures like this, here we have the sun, and here we have our planets, and here we have our habitable zone for the Earth here, where it's just about the right temperature. Now, though, that we know a lot more about stars and about finding planets around other stars and the rich range of planets, the habitable zone is extended a bit. So if you've got a smaller star, a brown dwarf, for instance, your habitable zone is going to be much closer to the star, whereas if you have a larger star, a much brighter star, your habitable zone is going to be further away. Here's Jupiter for comparison on in our own planetary system. But what's important about this is only looking at the surface of planets. So it's totally ignoring subsurface environments like the deep ocean floor and the hydrothermal vents. And it also ignores planetary satellites. So according to this, there's absolutely nothing that is likely to be viable on Jupiter. So bringing together all these other subject areas has really extended the idea of where the habitable zone is within our own planetary system. So, all right, I think I've already said this then. So the discovery of the hydrothermal vent fauna also led to realization then that photosynthesis is not the be-all and end-all of everything. All right, up until then, it was thought that plants were the basis of the food chain, and that the conversion of a CO2 to sugars by using energy from the sun was the driving mechanism. But now we've seen that chemosynthesis, that we've heard a lot about, and the actual energy from those reactions can host an amazing fauna. And the basis of what this can happen, it's a simple chemical reaction. It's an oxidation reduction reaction. And so we can now say, right, actually, we're not going to look for somewhere where is necessarily the right temperature. We're going to look for somewhere beyond the Earth where there is an appropriate energy source and also an appropriate mechanism for converting this energy into nutrients. All right, you can only convert the energy into nutrients if you've got something that can do it. Now, on the Earth, we have the energy source for chemosynthesis is the hot rocks at our spreading centres. Now, we've just heard a whole load about cold seeps, and in a panic, because until today I didn't really know anything at all about cold seeps, but in the tea break I came up to Chris and I said, Chris, you know, how hot's a cold seep? And he and Jorn told me that, well, they're fairly cold, actually. So I'm not going to really talk much about cold seeps at all. I'm just going to talk about hot rocks, the reaction between hot rocks and seawater, and the reactions that go on there. I'm not even really going to talk very much about those, but we have these areas on the Earth's crust where tectonic processes are moving rocks apart, and where rocks are being subducted, and we have all these reactions going on. Where else in our solar system could this happen? Well, there's no other planetary body that we're aware of within the solar system that has plate tectonics in the way that we know it, okay? But there are bodies within the solar system that do have active surfaces. And one of these bodies is Europa, which is the second Galilean satellite. Io is the first Galilean satellite, close to Jupiter. Europa, oh yeah, I'm just looking at this little thing. It looks like, you know, an oblate spheroid, but here it's nice and spherical. So Europa is actually the brightest satellite in the solar system because it is covered in ice. It has a very, very high albedo. It reflects an enormous amount of sunlight. But it's not completely white. It's dust covered as well. And the Galileo satellite in the 1990s took lots of images of the surface of Europa, and they found, this is about 50 kilometers across, they found that there were plates on the surface of Europa, and these rafts shift around, they've broken up, they've got features on them. Obviously this is a false colour image, but the different colours are indicative that there are different materials on this surface. It's mainly water ice, but there's a lot of dust in there as well. And what's causing these plates, these rafts of ice to move around? Now, the magnetometer on the satellite found that there were changes in the induced magnetic field of Europa. And what they inferred, scientists inferred, was that this was caused, these changes in signal were caused by convection in a subsurface liquid. Now, Europa doesn't have this solid crystal surface, it has an icy surface. And what's causing the icy surface to move is convection in a liquid below it. And that's thought to be an ocean. And so these cartoons from NASA indicate that there is an icy crust to Europa, which has got lots of dust, silicate dust on the surface, and there are plumes of water coming up, which come to the surface of Europa, and they actually produce little sort of jets. Now, what is keeping this subsurface ocean liquid? Because actually Europa, from its size, if it differentiated, should have cooled a long time ago and solidified. It shouldn't have a molten core. It shouldn't have hot rocks in its deep interior. But Europa is close enough to Jupiter that actually the effect of its orbit around Jupiter, Jupiter's gravitational pull is such that it squashes and squeezes Europa, a bit like squashing a squash ball, right? And so it's this constant clenching and unclenching, if you like, of the body, which keeps the internal part of Europa molten. Io, being closer in to Jupiter, is even in an even worse state, and that has active sulfur and silicate volcanoes which have been observed. But Europa just has this water. Now, you've got to get your heat from the inside out. How shall we do that? Let's do it at a hydrothermal vent. So here we've got the floor of Europa's ocean with some hydrothermal vents. Hey, if you've got hydrothermal vents, maybe we've got hydrothermal vent fauna. And so Europa became the #1 place that we want to explore to try and look for life beyond the Earth. Because there's all the building blocks of life there. All right, all the bits and pieces that are required on the Earth to get life going, the carbon, the hydrogen, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, they're all present on Europa because it's made from the same stuff as the Earth. It's changed a little bit because it's differentiated, because it's a satellite rather than a planet, but it is differentiated, so it's got all those bits. And so Europa has become a #1 place for us to actually look for life. Now, when this was first discussed, sort of 20 or so years ago, it was like, hey, Europa, fantastic. Since then, we've had the Cassini-Huygens mission to Saturn, and whereas these are cartoons, this is a real image from the Cassini orbiter of Enceladus, which is one of the large satellites of Saturn. And what you can see here is you can see a plume. And again, this was discovered by the magnetometer scientists at Imperial College, Michelle Doherty and her colleagues. She saw some really strange things in her data from the magnetometer, which she couldn't explain, and so she managed to persuade the entire team to turn the satellite round and make some more measurements when they found these plumes. And so these are, there's now a thought that Enceladus too might have some form of ocean, subsurface ocean. So we've already increased the number of planetary bodies within our own solar system where there's a possibility for vent fauna. And, you know, just because you know you can't have a talk at a meeting about hydrothermal vents and chemosynthesis without showing some gratuitous pictures of vent fauna. Here are some gratuitous pictures of vent fauna. Okay, we've seen them all before, but they're just absolutely fascinating. I mean, just to me, images like this are absolutely mind-blowing. So, and to think that there might be something like this at the bottom of a European ocean is amazing. What is very frustrating, though, is how are we going to find this out? There is no mission on the cards at the moment to explore Europa's subsurface ocean. It's too expensive, it's too technologically difficult. It's also too fraught with politics, you know, in terms of melting your way through the European ice. How would you do it? All right, you need an energy source. It would have to be nuclear. There's no doubt about it. You know, you would need a nuclear source to go and melt your way through the European ice, and that's, you know, a bit of a, you know, dodgy move at the moment. Well, it's always a dodgy move, I guess. The other way is to pepper the surface of Europa with projectiles. So send rockets to crash down into the surface of Europa, go down to the ocean floor and make measurements. But again, very not technologically difficult and far too expensive at the moment. Right, now, I listened with real, you know, like shock and amazement to Gillian's talk just before the tea break, because when I was putting this together, I thought, oh, well, you know, let's include Titan because we've got some nice pictures of Titan, but there's no way, I was going to say on Earth, but there's no way on Titan that we're going to have any sort of assemblage of animals there. But blow me, what do I hear? That you've got possibilities in the southern Gulf of Mexico, where you've got things that are eating asphalt. Well, Titan is the largest satellite of Saturn, and it was the target of the Huygens part of the Cassini-Huygens mission. And Huygens landed on the surface of Titan, and it took one photograph. And here's the photograph that it took, all right, here. And you can see here, there's a little crack in this rock. These are boulders of ice, and the Open University is very proud to say that we believe we broke this boulder, because the first part of the Huygens spacecraft to touch down on the surface of Titan was our little finger, which was going to measure how tough the surface was. And John Zarnecki, who's one of my colleagues, he was famous for describing it as creme brulee. It was like a thin crust with something like a slurry underneath. And we think that it was actually the shock of our penetrator. I say ours, nothing to do with me, so my colleagues at the OU. It was the shock of our penetrator which caused this boulder to crack. We've got no evidence whatsoever, but hey, why not? Let's claim it. So these boulders on the surface of Titan are of ice, but they're not of water ice. Titan has a very thick atmosphere of nitrogen and methane. It's got hydrogen in there as well. Some of the other images that were taken by the spacecraft as it came down through the atmosphere were of rivers and channels of ethane liquid. And so there is a possibility, and we have up here, a possible redox reaction between hydrogen and C2H2, giving you methane. Now that releases about 330 or so kilojoules per mole of energy. This is described in a paper by Chris McKay and his colleague in 2005. Now this compares with about 40 kilojoules per mole, which is what methanogens require to grow. So you've got, in theory, on paper, you have got all those ingredients there. You have got a recipe for something which might be able to take place. Unfortunately, what you've also got is a temperature of about minus 200 degrees C, which means that if the reaction is going to take place, it's going to take place extraordinarily slowly. And if anything's going, well, I mean, I don't think there's anything that's likely to survive at minus 200. Certainly not anything which has got any sort of blood in its body anyway. So, but what you've got to remember is that temperatures can be raised during impact. So there might be particular times when, certainly at the birth of the solar system, when there was a lot of bombardment going on, it's possible that something might have arisen that in the early atmosphere, which, remember, would have been very similar to the composition of the Earth's early atmosphere as a reducing composition. It's possible that something might have got going. Now, Stefan was talking about a needle in a haystack. That's easy compared to looking for, fossilized 4.5 billion year old bacteria which may or may not exist on Titan. If you want a challenge, you've got to be a planetary scientist rather than a paleontologist. But I just put it out there to show that, these things, if you start thinking about chemosynthesis seriously, that this sort of thing is a possibility. All right, so let's go beyond the solar system then and start looking for habitable zones beyond the solar system. Now, there's a whole raft of descriptions of where you may or may not find planets where life may or may not be possible. This is the Hubble Deep Field behind us, which is showing each one of these little blips here. These are galaxies. Each galaxy has got 10 to the 11 stars in it, approximately. No, yes, 10 to the 11 stars, is that right? It's 10 to the 11 galaxies in the universe, and there's 10 to the 11 stars in a galaxy, all right? So if you start looking in a probabilistic way at, all right, how many of those stars might have planets? How many of those planets might be at in a habitable zone and might have a moon going around them, a satellite, which could also be a habitable body as well. You've got zillions and zillions of them. That's a sort of technical mathematical derivation there. So you've got lots and lots and lots of them, but you can knock a lot out, because if they're too close to the center of the galaxy, where there's a supermassive black hole or whatever else there might be lurking in the middle of galaxies, you can be too far at the outside of the galaxy where all the dark energy is and the dark matter that cosmologists like to talk about. So it comes down to, you've got to have a nice safe habitat in a nice safe part of a a galaxy where there are not too many stars, becoming supernovae, all those sorts of things. But even so, there are still very many areas, very many sources of planets. Now, at the moment, the count as of lunchtime today, which is when I downloaded these, we've got about 1,000 extrasolar planets. Okay, so this is today, the 12th of March. This is a histogram of count, so that's 300 up there. So there's about 1,000 there, and this is binned by radius compared to the radius of Jupiter. All right, so here's the radius of Jupiter. So, and here's the radius of the Earth is about, Jupiter's about 300 times the radius of the Earth. So, we're right down here. So there's not very many. Looking at the same data in a different way, we've got the semi-major axis, the orbit of the planets, again, against the mass of Jupiter, 10 to the naught, that's 1, 10 to the minus 2, Earth's about here. So we haven't actually yet got any Earth-sized planets in Earth-like orbits. We've got lots and lots of big planets, very, very close to their central stars, these things called hot Jupiters. So for a long time, it was like, oh, the hot Jupiters, that's no good, that's no good, that's no good. But now there's an idea that, right, actually, these hot Jupiters might host planetary systems. And this was first suggested by David Kipping, I don't know, about 10 or so years ago, maybe a bit more now. And there's been quite a few searches for these satellites round exoplanets. Now, the way that astronomers look for exoplanets, they use several different techniques. One of the ones they use is planetary transits. And this is a cartoon, it's not a real image. Here you've got a star, here you've got a planet, which is going across the face of the star. When you observe the star directly, all right, this is the level of the light. As the planet goes in, so that's over here, all right. As the planet goes in front of the star, the light level drops as it goes across the star, and then when it comes out the other side, the light level goes back up again, all right. So this is a planetary transit technique, and it's found many stars, many planets this way. What we've got here is a moon, a satellite going around the planet, and this could give a secondary dip, which is marked, you've got it marked here, all right, as a secondary dip where the planet, the potential planet, has gone across. Now, these data are, the big dots here, are real data from the Kepler telescope, which was looking for planets, and these are data from Kepler 22b. What has been fit to these data, the blue dashed line and the red line, are these are not the true interpretation of what these data are. These are what the data would look like if there were a moon there. All right, and what they've concluded is, well, actually, there isn't a moon there. There isn't, because you can't fit either that line or the red line to it. So this was the best candidate out of all the things that Kepler found, the telescope, and they've decided that actually there isn't an exomoon there. So, but they're still looking, but they're saying that this is the sort of type of signal that we should look for. The other thing that we can do, I say we, I'm not an astronomer, the other thing that astronomers can do in the planetary transit method is, you can imagine here's your planet. Now, as it hits the edge of the star, if it has an atmosphere around it, the star's light will shine through the atmosphere. And if you have spectrometer on your telescope, you can actually get a spectroscopic reading of the atmosphere. And so we can now detect whether there's an atmosphere there and characterize what it is. What we found so far is that the atmospheres that have been found are mainly reducing, but they're also mainly hot silicate dust. So we've still got a long way to go before we can say, right, actually, yes, here's an exoplanet or an exomoon which has an atmosphere where we can start thinking, right, okay, we can start looking for where chemosynthesis is going on. What we also have to remember is that even though all these places have started off with the same stuff, you know, and we might have started off with our little vestimentaria, you know, but they might not necessarily have evolved into, you know, a sentient being or even a handsome young man like my son. You know, it's like you've got to think that evolution changes things, you know. We might all have been dinosaurs if we hadn't been wiped out by an asteroid 65 million years ago. I'm not saying anybody in the Jolsock is a dinosaur, of course. So, you know, we've got to think that we can't just take our observations and transplant them to another body. We've got to think of everything else that goes on. All right, so this is my final slide. This might be my final slide. Yes, summary, which has got 42 subparts to it. Have we found evidence for extant life beyond the Earth? No, we haven't. None at all, not a vestige. So that's supposed to say no now. Come on. No. Have we found evidence for extinct life beyond the Earth? No, again, not a vestige, all right? Have we found evidence for habitats where life might exist beyond the Earth? And I think yes, the answer to that is yes. As far as chemosynthesis goes, possibly for photosynthesis as well, on some bodies. So I don't want to give up on photosynthesis. Now, we heard earlier that, you know, chlorophyll is what is used for photosynthesis. But actually, it doesn't use chlorophyll. Chlorophyll A only uses a very, very specific waveband for its the chemical reactions. And actually, in cells, there's a whole host of other pigments which assist, which expand that waveband that chlorophyll A works at. So it's not, I think, beyond the bounds of you know, speculation, and I have no bounds to my speculation, that you can think of other places where other pigments might evolve, you know, something that is active in the infrared, which can be used to actually drive some of these chemosynthetic mechanisms. So I don't want to give up on the idea of finding flowers somewhere else. You know, fauna good, flowers good. I hope that eventually, maybe in 20 years, maybe in 40 years, you know, 40 years since we found the first vent fauna, 40 years' time, we might find the first extraterrestrial flora. Thanks very much.
Okay, so in the meeting schedule, we put in 10 minutes or so for discussion. So perhaps we could have a few questions first for Monica, and then if anyone wants to make some general points or wants to ask questions of earlier speakers, then we can do that as well. And then after that, we have a short drinks reception where you're very welcome to talk to speakers, talk to each other, and also have a look at the few posters that we have brought along with us. So firstly, some questions for Monica. Adrian first, please.
Oh, just on this, you mentioned it's a little bit sad that the Europa mission planned. Is there any little teasers or?
Well, there's a mission planned called JUICE, which is going to go to the Jovian system, but it's again going to look at plasmas and all sorts of things. So there will be the possibility of, I mean, it will go close to Europa. It'll take much better images of Europa, but it's not going to land anything on Europa. I mean, when it was first proposed, it was hoped that it would, but it's just too expensive, and that isn't going to launch until, can't remember, 2020 something, 5, something like that. Can't remember. It's not going to get there. It's not going to get there until 2033. Okay. No, not in the slightest. No. I mean, I would prefer them not to be too destructive, obviously, but I mean, you have to, you know, you can't make an omelette without breaking an egg, you know. So.
I think all the problems or issues they've had to get around drilling Antarctic.
Exactly.
Right? So
exactly. Yeah. Just think of Lake Vostok, of drilling Lake Vostok, and imagine drilling Lake Vostok with a nuclear source. All right, and people are very worried now about launching satellites, launching rockets which carry RTGs, and you would need one of those to get. Yeah, I know it does. But there was questions asked in Congress and so on and so forth. So. Mm-hmm. Right, the clay mineral. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The single strand of yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. 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 Yep. Mm-hmm. 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 Well, the red colour of Mars is because of iron oxide, and you've got the iron in the rocks oxidized by the ultraviolet radiation. But yes, you're absolutely right about the clay minerals. I mean, there's a thought that they might act as a substrate. So you've got something there which things can attach to, and if they're all sitting with their hydrophilic ends out or their hydrophobic ends out, you're going to get a preferred orientation of your particles, which can then build up a membrane, which is one of the major steps forward when you're looking at the origin of life. So thank you for your comments. Thank you.
Yeah.
Demonstrated that the analysis of the composition of atmospheres can be very useful information. Meaning Rosick made that point that without the existence of photosynthesis, life cannot change the atmosphere in a meaningful way. Do you have a feeling on that topic or even a strong opinion?
I don't know whether my opinion is particularly strong, but my understanding is that once you've got when a planet gets going and it has its primary atmosphere, which is delivered to it by comets and asteroids, and also comes partially from degassing. If you have a huge event, something might change the composition of the atmosphere. So, for instance, on Mars, we think there's been a catastrophic degassing which stripped off its very early atmosphere. And since then, its atmosphere has been evolving because of the addition of micrometeorites to the surface of Mars, and also from stripping by cosmic radiation at the top of Mars, so atmospheric sputtering. So you can have a very slow change of an atmosphere, of a composition, and there is some slim evidence that that's happened for Mars, which comes from looking at gases trapped in some of the meteorites that we have from Mars, which have had their atmospheric gas trapped at different times. But it's not a huge change. It's not gone from oxygen dominated to nitrogen dominated or anything like that. It's more subtle in terms of the change of the argon 40 to 36 ratio and things like that. So non-biological or non-photosynthetic mechanisms for changing the atmosphere. I don't know what caused our Earth to change. Atmosphere change 2.2 billion years ago. That was what do you call them? The cyanobacteria, which was based on photosynthesis. So you can only get the massive change, but you might be able to get a more subtle change. I don't think that's a simple question at all. I think it's cynical question. Sorry, okay. And I don't think it's a cynical question either. I mean, it's a question that you have to ask because, I mean, how far away is our nearest star? It's 4 light years away, Proxima Centauri. So it takes light 4 years to get there. So how long would it take a spacecraft to get there? A heck of a lot longer than 4 light years. And we've only had 13.7 billion years of the universe to evolve in. So, yeah, you might cynically say, what's the chances? Very, very slim. But even if it's a slim chance, do you ignore it and not continue to speculate and look for it? I mean, we might not have been visited by anything alive, and I don't think we have at all. We might not have the opportunity to visit anywhere that's got any sort of life on it. But I don't think that means that we shouldn't continue to look and see if there are prospects for life beyond our own planetary system. I think it will be. I think it
amazing religious question.
It raises interesting ethical questions, yeah. And I think it'll raise really interesting and important ethical questions for about a day. All right, and then it'll evaporate because we'll be judging the X Factor, or Prince Harry will get married or something. These questions. I mean, it's like life on Mars. For a great number of people in 1996, some American scientists found some little worms, or an image of something that looked a bit like a worm, inside a Martian meteorite. Now, for a lot of people who aren't keeping up with events, that's still the case. And it hasn't changed much, has it? It hasn't changed anything. You can start then having philosophical discussions about, do we have the right to visit other planetary systems? Do we have the right to visit other planetary bodies within our own solar system and potentially change the habitats? I mean, I know I have a colleague who took some fertilizer to above the Arctic Circle to see if anything would grow there. It's like, well, you shouldn't have done that. That's going to, upset the lemmings. It's like, well, if we go and start looking at Mars and thinking, hey, we can terraform Mars, we can make it look like the Earth, we can give it an atmosphere, we can melt the polar caps. You start having ethical issues about whether we should do that. I mean, I don't think we should, actually. I think we should spend a lot more of our hard-earned cash on our own planet before we start mucking up somebody else's planet. But
one quick one.
Yeah. Going back to Europa.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I doubt that there are any vent tunnels down there because they require oxygen, and that only comes from photosynthesis. But there might be some of your bacteria in whatever reduction. Do you actually have to go down to the seafloor to find them? I mean, I would expect if there are hypothetical vents with living bacteria around, at some point they should be, drift up to the
Yeah.
The underside of the ice cover. If
Yeah.
that's constantly being turned over,
Yeah.
you should find them by just screening the surface.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the first experiments that people want to do, is actually look at what the spectroscopic composition of the surface is, because at the moment we've only got very, very poorly resolved spectra from the surface. So you need to look at it with there's nothing that has orbited Europa. Things have only flown past Europa. So you need something to be orbiting Europa and taking images constantly and taking spectroscopic data constantly of the surface and how does it change. Because we know what the signal for chlorophyll is, we know what the signal for dead leaves are, all those sorts of things. We know what their spectral signatures are. So we need, start looking for those sort of things.
Would that be much cheaper and much less problematic than exploring a nuclear plant?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the cost is of the rocket to actually get you out to the system.
Right, I think we, on the basis of time, need to call the meeting to a close. So if you want to ask questions specifically of speakers, then perhaps you can do so at the short drinks reception. I want to thank everyone for coming along, and I hope you've all learned something from a very interdisciplinary meeting, which is what we planned it to be. And we've heard geology, paleontology, and astrobiology, so hopefully there's something for everyone. So if we could just give speakers one last round of applause and